The Great Plains of the American West were once a vast expanse of open sky and rolling grasslands, stretching as far as the eye could see. This immense landscape, with its endless horizon and boundless beauty, was a place of freedom and abundance. This was the homeland of the Lakota Sioux, a proud and independent people who had thrived in this environment for generations. Their villages with teepees dotting the plains were a testament to their resourcefulness and deep connection to the land. Their lives were deeply intertwined with the buffalo, the land, and the rhythms of nature. The buffalo provided them with food, clothing, and shelter, and their hunting practices were sustainable, ensuring that the herds would continue to roam the plains for future generations. For centuries, the Lakota lived in harmony with their environment, engaging in traditional activities that honored the earth and its creatures. They held ceremonies and rituals that celebrated the changing seasons and the cycles of life, fostering a deep spiritual connection to their surroundings. But the arrival of European settlers in the 19th century brought about a tragic and irreversible change. The settlers, driven by the promise of land and wealth, encroached upon the Lakota's territory, disrupting their way of life, and bringing with them new diseases and technologies. The encroachment of white settlers, the decimation of the buffalo herds, and the forced relocation to reservations brought immense suffering to the Lakota people. The mass hunting of buffalo by settlers and the construction of railroads led to the near extinction of the buffalo, depriving the Lakota of their primary resource. Their way of life, their culture, and their very existence were under threat. The reservations were often located on barren lands, unsuitable for farming or hunting, and the Lakota struggled to adapt to this new and harsh reality. Broken treaties and unfulfilled promises added to their despair. The U.S. government repeatedly reneged on agreements, reducing the size of reservations and failing to provide the promised supplies and support. By the late 1800s, the Lakota, like many Native American tribes, found themselves confined to reservations, stripped of their traditional hunting grounds, and facing poverty and disease. The lack of resources and the spread of illnesses took a heavy toll on their population. The U.S. government's policy of assimilation further eroded their traditional way of life. This policy aimed to integrate Native Americans into mainstream American society, often at the cost of their cultural identity. Children were taken from their families and forced to attend boarding schools where they were forbidden to speak their language or practice their customs. These schools sought to civilize the children, but in doing so, they stripped them of their heritage and identity. The Lakota people yearned for a return to their traditional way of life, a way of life that seemed to be slipping away with each passing season. Elders would reminisce about the days of freedom and abundance, sharing stories with the younger generation in hopes of keeping their culture alive. In the face of such adversity, a glimmer of hope emerged in the form of a new spiritual movement, the Ghost Dance. This movement, which promised the return of the buffalo and the restoration of their lands, offered a sense of hope and unity among the Lakota. This movement, with its promise of renewal and a return to a world without suffering, spread like wildfire across the reservations, offering solace and a vision of a brighter future. The Ghost Dance brought the Lakota together, rekindling their spirit and giving them strength in the face of overwhelming odds. Little did the Lakota know that this flicker of hope would soon be extinguished in a horrific tragedy on the banks of Wounded Knee Creek. The massacre at Wounded Knee in 1890 marked a devastating blow to the Lakota as hundreds of men, women, and children were killed and the dream of renewal was shattered. In 1888, a Paiute prophet named Wovoka experienced a vision during a solar eclipse. This event marked a significant turning point in Native American history, as Wovoka's vision would inspire a movement that sought to bring hope and renewal to many tribes. In this vision, he was taken to the spirit world, where he saw the Creator and learned of a coming time of renewal for Native Americans. Wovoka was shown a future where the hardships and suffering of his people would be alleviated, and a new era of harmony and prosperity would begin. He was given instructions for a sacred dance, the Ghost Dance, which, when performed with sincerity and faith, would reunite the living with the spirits of the dead, bring back the buffalo, and restore the land to its former glory. This dance was more than just a ritual. It was a powerful symbol of hope and resilience. The Ghost Dance movement spread rapidly across the West, resonating deeply with tribes who had suffered greatly at the hands of the U.S. government. The promise of a restored world where their cultural heritage and way of life could thrive once more was a beacon of hope for many. The Lakota people in particular embraced the ghost dance with fervor. For them, it was not just a spiritual practice but a profound expression of their identity and resistance against the forces that sought to erase their culture. They saw it as a way to restore their lost way of life, to heal the wounds of the past, and to usher in an era of peace and prosperity. The dance became a unifying force, bringing together communities in a shared vision of a better future. The ghost dance was not a war dance, nor was it a call to arms. It was a peaceful and spiritual movement, emphasizing the importance of prayer, meditation, and a deep connection to the natural world. It was a deeply spiritual movement, grounded in prayer, meditation, and a profound connection to the natural world. Participants believed that through these practices, they could invoke the power of the spirits to bring about the promised renewal. Participants wore special shirts adorned with sacred symbols, believing these garments would protect them from harm. These shirts were not just clothing but sacred objects imbued with spiritual significance. They danced for days on end, their chants and prayers echoing across the desolate plains, their hearts filled with hope for a brighter future. The rhythmic movements and the collective energy of the dance created a powerful sense of unity and purpose. However, the U.S. government viewed the ghost dance with suspicion and fear. They misunderstood the movement's true nature and saw it as a potential threat to their control over the Native American population. They saw it as a threat to their authority, a potential catalyst for unrest and rebellion. The government's response was one of increasing hostility and aggression, further exacerbating tensions. This fear, fueled by prejudice and a fundamental misunderstanding of Native American culture and spirituality, would have tragic consequences. The misinterpretation of the ghost dance's peaceful intentions led to violent confrontations, culminating in the devastating Wounded Knee Massacre, a tragic chapter in the history of Native American resistance. The growing popularity of the ghost dance among the Lakota and other tribes alarmed white settlers and government officials. This spiritual movement, which promised the return of the ancestors and the restoration of the Native American way of life, was seen as a direct challenge to the encroaching influence of the United States. Rumors spread like wildfire, distorted by fear and prejudice. Sensational headlines in newspapers and exaggerated accounts in letters and documents painted the ghost dance as a harbinger of rebellion and violence. The ghost dance was misconstrued as a war dance, a prelude to a violent uprising against the United States. This misinterpretation was fueled by the settlers' lack of understanding of Native American culture and their own deep-seated fears. The sacred shirts worn by the dancers were seen as impenetrable armor, fueling paranoia and fear among the white population. These garments, believed by the dancers to protect them from harm, were misinterpreted as a sign of impending conflict. The U.S. government responded with force, deploying troops to reservations across the West. The presence of the military was intended to intimidate and control the Native American population, but it only served to escalate the situation. Their mission was to suppress the ghost dance movement and to quell what they perceived as a growing threat to their authority. The soldiers' presence was a constant reminder of the power imbalance and the ever-present threat of violence. The presence of heavily armed soldiers on their lands only heightened the tension and fear among the Lakota people, who were already struggling to survive in the harsh conditions of the reservation. The constant surveillance and the threat of military action created an atmosphere of fear and uncertainty. Adding to the escalating tension was the death of Sitting Bull, a revered Lakota leader. His leadership and spiritual guidance had been a source of strength for the Lakota people, and his loss was deeply felt. Fearing his influence and potential to unite the Lakota people in resistance, Indian agents ordered his arrest. The decision to arrest Sitting Bull was seen as a direct attack on the Lakota's autonomy and their right to self-determination. During the arrest, a scuffle broke out, and Sitting Bull was shot and killed. His death was a tragic and violent end to a life dedicated to the preservation of his people's way of life. His death sent shockwaves through the Lakota community, further fueling their despair and distrust of the U.S. government. The loss of such a significant leader left a void that was difficult to fill. In this atmosphere of fear, suspicion, and profound cultural misunderstanding, the stage was set for a tragedy that would forever stain the conscience of a nation. The tension between the Native Americans and the U.S. government was at a breaking point. A group of Lakota, led by Chief Spotted Elk, also known as Bigfoot, decided to seek refuge at the Pine Ridge Reservation, hoping to find safety and protection from further violence. Their journey was fraught with danger and uncertainty, but they were determined to find a place where they could live in peace. Little did they know that their journey would end in a massacre that would echo through history. The Wounded Knee Massacre would become a symbol of the devastating impact of the U.S. government's policies on Native American communities, a tragic reminder of the cost of fear and misunderstanding. Following Sitting Bull's death, a band of Lakota, led by the ailing chief Spotted Elk, Bigfoot, decided to seek refuge with Red Cloud, a respected leader at the Pine Ridge Reservation. They believed they would be safe under his protection. Exhausted, starving, and burdened with grief, they set out on a long and arduous journey through the bitter cold of the South Dakota winter. As Bigfoot's band made their way toward Pine Ridge, the 7th Cavalry, the same regiment involved in the infamous Battle of Little Bighorn 14 years earlier, was dispatched to intercept them. The soldiers, led by Colonel James Forsyth, caught up with the Lakota on December 28, 1890, at Wounded Knee Creek. The Lakota, weary from their journey and vastly outnumbered, surrendered peacefully to the soldiers. They were disarmed and escorted to a campsite near Wounded Knee Creek, where they were ordered to set up camp. The atmosphere was tense, heavy with suspicion and fear. The Lakota, stripped of their weapons and surrounded by armed soldiers, felt vulnerable and afraid. That evening, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the snow-covered prairie, Colonel Forsyth ordered his men to confiscate the Lakota's remaining possessions, including their few remaining rifles. The soldiers, fueled by fear and prejudice, went about their task with unnecessary aggression, further escalating the tension in the camp.